We're good. We're gonna start, guys.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
Poverty line for kids in poverty in schools.
Good evening. I would like to call the May 28th Addison Central School District Board meeting to order. The current time is 6:30 p.m. As our usual practice, we're going to start the meeting with introductions. And Jamie, I'm going to have you start.
Jamie Marcello. Ryan Blau. Jason Chance.
Trisha Allen, Ellie Brown,
Suzanne Beck.
Mary Heather Noble,
Laura Harthan.
Chip Malcolm.
Joanna Doria,
Barb Wilson.
Tim Williams.
Matt Correnti, Director of Finance and Operations.
And our leadership team.
Nicole Carter, Assistant Superintendent, Equity and Student Services.
Courtney Braun, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Go ahead.
Jen Kravitz, Mary Children Principal.
Excellent.
Barb, Steve online.
And Steve. Sorry.
Steve Orzek.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. Next is a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda as warned.
A second.
I'll second.
Okay, Ellie
Yep.
yeah.
Got it.
If there is no objection, the agenda is approved as warned. Okay. Next on our agenda is our time for public comment on agenda items. And Matt, do we have any public attending? It looks like we might have
Three public, no hands.
no hands.
Or, yeah, two public.
Okay. Anyone in the room wish to make a public comment? Okay. So moving right along, recommendation to approve the May 13th meeting minutes. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
If there is no objection, the minutes are approved as submitted. Okay, seeing none, they're approved. Moving right along. Time to approve the ACSD bills. I'll turn it over to Chip.
The bills were read on the 20th of May. Jason and I read them. And there's one general account bill for $899,455.16. There is a McGilton Fund amount for $15,635. And there are two payroll warrants, one for $1,016,509.73 and another for $724,467.58. I move that we accept paying the bills.
A second? Thank you, Jason. And once again, if there is no objection, I would like to have us approve the ACSD bills as recorded by Chip. Okay, seeing no objections, the bills are approved. We're actually moving right along. Our student reps we don't have here tonight, so we're going to just skip over that agenda item, which brings us to report of the superintendent. And we are running ahead of time, so like if we want to have a little bit more time, I know we cut, so you don't have to rush, Karam. Karam, okay? So we're all good. Yeah. So we could take our, time on it. We got plenty of time. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Karam has been working with our administrative team all year long and helping us reflect on our approaches to how we engage people, and we're looking for some time for him to work with the board, particularly at retreat, correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, he won't be here on Saturday, so this is really it's helping us prep for Saturday. and we'll work out how we
Later on.
engage
So you're
more.
free Saturday.
Yes, yes, you're lucky.
So with that, I'll turn over to Karan.
All right, cool, thanks. It was fun to figure out what my weekend schedule was gonna be like.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for making time to let me connect. And I do want to go around and have us do a quick introduction. But yeah, as Tim said, it's been an honor and a delight to work, meeting with students and actually having students in the the district and at Mary Hogan in particular. And then also working with teachers, with administrators, and school leaders. And the kind of work that I think all of us are interested in is work that's deeply rooted in a sense that everyone that goes to school should be able to fully participate in the experience that we want for them. And it's hard to fake that, and it's impossible to work with people that don't believe in that. And what has been encouraging is at every level of this work, whoever I've been working with, they care deeply about the barriers that get in the way of full participation, and they sincerely want for our students, for our educators, schooling that is fostering belonging in really important ways. Now, with that said, having done this work as an educator and someone that supports teams in nonprofit organizations as well as in public institutions, every layer matters, and everyone's always talking about the other parts of the conversation, right? But the part that gets talked about the most when people are experiencing a sense of, I'm not sure what needs to change, it often is like their perception of up, right? Up is often the board. And so if the board is in the conversation, it creates a lot more opportunity for really transformational work to continue to happen. And for people to really feel like this is shared work, this isn't niche, it's not specialized, it's not Band-Aid, it's not for just some people to carry a lot of. So I'm really excited about the conversation tonight and to know that you all are interested in engaging. And like I said, I do want to do a round of introductions, but I want to do a little bit different. I'm going to ask you all, I started life out as a middle school teacher, so a lot of what I do is basically just what I used to do in middle school classrooms. I want us to pair off and just start with a very fundamental question, right? What does belonging, right? Because belonging gets named so much in the strategic plan, it gets named so much in what we're trying to foster in our community. It's oftentimes a thing gets named when we are not experiencing it, when our students aren't experiencing it, when our educators aren't experiencing it. So let's just start there, just turn to a partner and talk about what does belonging mean to you, and then when we come back, I'll have you introduce yourself, and then just in a word or two, just share what you talked about, something that reflects something you shared. So I'll see you in a couple minutes. What does belonging mean to you? 2, 4, 6. Yeah. We'll have a trio. Yeah.
It's us.
As long as there's not 2 trios, then the master. Yeah. So I didn't feel any belonging in that exercise.
That's
Oh
always
yeah.
a hard question.
Can someone talk to Steve?
Yeah, because,
Are we,
we don't want to leave Steve out.
oh, Steve, how do we bring Steve
Well,
in?
what about one of the?
Whoever has a functioning, like maybe.
So could you guys bring Steve into yours discussion? Steve, we're going to have you join Matt and Dr. Williams.
Okay, I'm not sure how that's gonna happen.
No.
Oh, okay,
Don't mess with it.
okay. So I'm
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, so say the rate, so I just want to do
I think feeling like you have a place and a place and also
safely, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So belonging.
Function.
That kind of sounds really good. Yeah,
Be whatever
like,
that is.
you know, for me, it's like feeling accepted, feeling comfortable, feeling
It would be a case of having
that you're
least
not
respect
being,
of whatever you're gonna say.
you know, feel afraid, right? You know, just a risky thing. So I really love that.
Place
Because
to
it really
have
sums
that.
it all up. You know,
Yeah.
everything I think about, it really does come down to like knowing what people right? Make mistakes.
To me, it would be something, defining it in so many ways, I guess, what a cast of a show, whether it's a board. I mean, part of me a little different places.
Yes, the feeling what and I think, yeah, I think
Yeah, although,
I'm thinking from a student perspective.
yeah, no, I know that, but I'm trying to think of big time as far as belonging, the student perspective part. Missed if you weren't there.
I don't know.
That's a good point, because in fact, a lot of times you see kids acting out as being
Right, not to say something,
in a positive way.
you know, like permission, needed parental permission, which is kind of cool that we're doing
So wherever it feels like an okay place to pause.
Can only go so far.
Yeah.
Go in
We
circles.
can go a lot deeper, or we could pause where we are. But so I'll start at the end of the table here, and if you don't mind, just saying your name and just in a word or two, reflect out something about what you share. What does belonging mean to you? I know it would take a lot more than a couple words to really capture it, but even just a little bit of what belonging means. And Steve, I appreciate that you didn't have a chance to pair off, so we'll give you extra time. You can have several sentences when we get to you. So yeah.
Matt Carenti, Director of Finance and Operations, and the word that I came up with was sort of a lack of fear.
Lack of fear. Beautiful, thank you. Do you want to?
Tim Williams. Also, acceptance of thought.
Barb Wilson. I had several, but I'll just use one, and I'm not going to steal Joanna's, though I love it. Safe.
Ability to take risks.
And your name?
Joanna Dory.
Oh, she said. Well, she did say your name. I don't know why. I'm into protocol tonight for some reason. Yeah.
Chip,
So-
we didn't talk about it, but respect is something that I heard. Belonging.
Thanks, Jim.
Well, Laura Harthan, a feeling that you would be missed if you're not there.
Oh, I like that.
I got a reaction.
I was going to use that, but that was her line.
It captures so much. I mean, all of it.
Good one. It's like being in a reading group and everyone like has these yummy poetry noises. Yes. Okay, sorry. Mary Heather Noble. I guess, we agreed a lot on things, so I'm just going to pick one.
That's fine.
But yeah, just feeling safe, both physically but also emotionally, like being able to say what you want to say without feeling like there's going to be immediate backlash or repercussion.
Oh man, we had so much going on. Eye contact, body language, the acceptance piece.
Yeah. This kind of connects to that too. Coram was saying to feel seen. Yeah.
Ellie Rump, and my first thing was feeling safe.
but since that's been stated so many times, I'll add feeling heard.
Yeah, and I will say that, like, to me, it's not intellectual plagiarism. If we're coming up with the same words, it's actually a really great sign that there's like these, it's good that we have the same words. So hearing safe again and again matters a lot, as well as feeling heard. Yeah, thank you.
Well, yeah, so safe, but safe, I think to me it means more like safe to express yourself,
Hmm.
right? Oh, I'm Trisha.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
I'm Jason. And I had at ease to say what's on your mind.
When the three of us were speaking, it came out that there were probably different levels of this situation. And Jamie, can I say what you were talking about? Jamie said when he went to Middlebury College to be hired, what they based his hiring on.
Well, not exactly. Not exactly, but go ahead. This is gonna be great.
So that's why?
Just wait. Yeah.
John Flowers is on there, just so
Yeah.
Maybe they were less than as serious as they might have been. Maybe they were just skimming the surface in these qualities. Close?
Well, I'll just say it. So we were talking, and I think Brian said, about fitting in. And then I explained that it's easy to get hired at Middlebury if you fit in. In other words, if you fit a mold. So then in some way we were talking about belonging being fitting in, whether you fit a mold or not. That would be a good measure.
Oh,
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I love the way that came, like a jazz, like you don't know where it's going. And it all just like lands in the right place. That was you couldn't have orchestrated that better.
Okay.
Yeah, that was well done. Well done. Yeah. Thank you, Brian and Jamie. Yeah. You should take the show live. Okay, are we allowed to ask
Steve, too.
Oh yeah, let's go to Steve and then maybe we'll come back. Steve, and you can have long form here.
Oh, it shouldn't take too long. I thought of it in a sense of when you have possessions, you have something that belongs to you. And I thought of it in a way that if you have a sense of belonging, that the group wants you to be there. The idea that they want you and that they want to have you around and be part of that group. So.
Beautiful. Thank you, Steve. Are you?
So I don't mind, but normally we don't. I know normally the board.
Okay, so
yeah.
we'll just.
I would love to hear what they have to say.
We don't allow.
Well, I will name, just to repeat, the lack of fear, acceptance of thought, safety, ability to take risks, respect, feeling missed, safety, eye contact, body language, feeling safe and heard, feeling safe in terms of expression, feeling at ease, making people fit in, make an environment where people can fit in, and people want you, right? And so I just want us to pause for a moment, and I think this has already happened during your conversations, and just think about how we feel when those things are real in our life, whether it's in our home life, in our personal life, in our work life, in our communities, what that actually feels like, what it feels like in our bodies, the way it loosens us up, the way it opens us, the way we are willing to take risks and chances with where we're going to grow our skills, the ways in which we take risks and chances with what we're willing to call ourselves, what we're willing to name ourselves as a team or an individual, the kind of growth that's possible. When we're not confronted with doubt, shame, exclusion, marginalization, judgment, right? When those kind of infiltrating forces come in that slow us down, tighten us up, and make us less willing to participate more fully in a community, right? And so we know what that feels like, and we know what it does, and there's an extraordinary amount of evidence that supports what it does for learning. So it's I think, a really exciting way of organizing your sense of vision as a board to talk and think and imagine and participate in belonging. Now, one of the things that I think is really important also is as we name these things and we have this conversation tonight, that we can practice them, right? Because it's something that is offered, right? Back to kind of Brian and Jamie, it's the creation of, it's the fostering of belonging, it's the building, right? And so how are we doing that tonight for one another as we continue this conversation? Can we make space to signal that we're not listening with judgment? We're listening with invitation, with curiosity, with inquiry, with empathy, with compassion, right? Not with making sure that people are getting the right answer and not the wrong answer. That there's a moral set of assumptions that people have to fulfill in order to participate, right? So I just want to say all that loud because normally I would take the time and have us say, what do you need to have this conversation go well? And I would put it on the whiteboard and we'd spend a half hour just doing that. But this is the short version where I'm just inviting us in to have this conversation with openness so that we can participate with a sense of belonging as we talk about belonging. Because one of the great ironies with equity work of any kind is it becomes yet another idea. And once it becomes a mental construct, you can do anything to anyone, right? And it's not equitable in the name of equity. That happens all the time. And sometimes we catch ourselves in my work and we laugh, right? Like, okay, that's not very equitable as we sort of like advocate for equity, right? That's not going to make people feel belonging as we advocate for belonging. And so it's as important to me to practice in the moment as it is to have a good idea, right? And that's part of why I asked Barb to share kind of the framework of practices that some of the wonderful folks in this room have been a part of. Is the practice itself becomes actually one of the most important roles that a board plays. Because it's the op-ed, it's the public comment, it's the hot mic moment, it's the one-on-one with a parent or a constituent where the practice shows up. And the mental model won't help that, right? If in that moment we can't pause and reflect and kind of figure out how our position in this conversation is impacting the conversation, what empathy, what compassion, what reflective language will do in that moment is profound, because it's not oftentimes what we're presumed to have, right? We're like, oftentimes, administrators and board members are like sort of perceived a certain way. When we disrupt that with the kinds of belonging practices that that we can bring into that work, it changes. It is the institutional work. It does what policy making can never do, right? Which is to practice. And so a lot of what I'm really interested in any space is the practice. And so as we practice that a little bit, I also want to name a hope that I have for you all as you continue to have conversations about belonging, is that you find ways to check in with one another on whether or not everyone feels like they belong in this conversation, they're able to participate, and what people need in order to participate. And so with that, I want to open it up, and I promise that's my longest preamble, but I do want to open it up and ask for you from where you sit, right? And again, play at your own level of comfort here, but the more open and willing we are to move into this conversation, I think the more we can generate for all of us. What gets in the way in our community, right? We listed these beautiful values, right? These roots of expression and being. They're so important to the human experience, to the academic experience. What gets in the way? What are the barriers to belonging from where you sit?
I'm just one right off the top of my head, because we've been thinking a lot about it, just in our committee, just like the rigidity of procedure.
Can you say, I'm hearing, like, actually, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe
Yeah.
you want to jump in, Tricia, but even just, thinking about how we conduct, our procedure for public comment, our procedure for this, in fact,
Right, right. Or, just, norms and frameworks.
Yeah.
A child who has trouble sitting still isn't going to fit in real well in a class where you're supposed to sit at a desk all day long, right? Like,
So there's,
expectations.
yeah. So there's two layers that I'm hearing, if,
Yeah.
if other people want to jump in, because one is like, so the procedures that we've sort of projected onto ourselves, like, okay, so everyone gets to talk about their definition of belonging except for the people that.
Yes, exactly.
So like,
Exactly.
you know,
Sorry, guys.
and not to create hypervisibility around that, but just to name it, right, just to put it in the space,
Absolutely.
right, because it's here, right, so how does that procedure become an ironic kind of barrier to belonging in some circumstances? And then the other one is like as deep as the ocean, right? It's like the actual hidden curriculum of schooling, like what it means to be a good student and to participate if you're neurodiverse, if you're coming from a family or community that doesn't participate in, you know, intellectual engagement in this kind of way, right? Where it's one-on-one and not collective, right? All the ways in which we sort of erase other ways of learning because there's these like, and that's deeper than, you know, Addison County or Vermont or America even, right? And so all of that, right? So I just want to name those two layers. There's the ones that we give to ourselves and the ones that we inherit, but they both, you know, those kinds of, what you're describing, Mary, is rigid procedures, right, get in the way. Anyone want to speak to that one in particular? And we can move to others if not.
Well, it's a big ask for people who want to come and address the school board
Yeah.
to come and speak in this kind of setting where all of a sudden you have to stand up, you have 3 minutes, and like there's 13 plus pairs of eyes staring at you.
Yeah.
That's a big ask, I think.
But but if we're looking at belonging, okay, that's a barrier, yes, to belonging as a part of the governing body. But there's a difference, all right? We belong to this. The person who's not on the school board does not belong to the school board. They have the right to do it. And so those restrictions then become put in place in order to allow the function of the board to proceed, or else it would be if we're looking at this one example, it would be one hearing constantly. Because we would be listening, we would be responding, we'd be listening, somebody else would respond. So it is, yes, but it's structure, but the structure put in place at times not to keep somebody out of belonging, as far as I'm concerned. But, because I'm looking at belonging a little different, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm almost hearing you talk about the same need, but from two different places, right? The need to participate requires some kind of format structure, right? Because otherwise, that can be oppressive in and of itself, right? Then who is going to feel like they can be the loudest in a large group, right? There's a lot of really interesting work on, you know, sort of the oppression of like flat communities where there's no sort of sense of structure because a lot of our biases play out and the kind of social advantages that already exist only grow because there's no procedure, there's no structure to manage that everyone gets this amount of time, and you know, and generally it's women, it's people of color, it's working and poor people in flat systems without procedures. The people that are most often marginalized, that marginalization accelerates. So there's lines on the road for a reason, and are these the lines we need? Right. That's the question that I hear you naming. Is this the way that it has to happen? But I just want to name that you're actually trying to meet the same need. You're trying, like what I hear you say is, we value full participation, right? And the question is, does that create a kind of, is the particular structure the one that will meet that need, or are there alternatives? So I just wanted to name that. And
one of the things we're talking about a lot at the Communication and Engagement Committee meetings are, you know, we have this in place for this reason, but what are other ways that we can foster a sense of belonging within the school community where they feel like they have some sort of, you know, power to come to the board and to bring issues to us and to be actively involved in giving feedback to the board so that we can do our jobs better. Right.
I don't want to jump to this,
Sure.
like to the fix. No, because I'm like right there with, this is a problem with a room full of people that care about education. They tend to be doers, and I get caught, so I'm catching myself. I'm going to say it quickly just to get it out of my system. But then I want to come back to this, is, you know, models, for instance, of appreciative inquiry, where you have a facilitator and some members of the board and some members of the community meeting in smaller, still procedural, it's still organized and structured, but it's facilitated in a physical circle, which I will say, kind of like body language, it's literally a body language, right? It's an embodiment of a language. And I teach in circle, and I've done it for 25 years, and I will tell you, it's incredibly different than when I teach in rows and lines. It's something, it kicks in a set of messages that you don't have to actually articulate about who gets to participate. And so, again, I will not cheat again. We won't get to the things that we could do until later, but I just had to get it out. Okay, thank you. You did too. Thank you, Laura. We'll make that our footnote. But we could talk about rigidity and procedure some more, but I wanted to open it up to that or others. What are other barriers to belonging?
It may not be a barrier, but one of the things that I see, if a person comes from the community and maybe thinks that they're part of the educational community, not the board, but the overall educational community, and they provide information or ask questions, and then they leave. And that's it.
Like a one and done kind of just.
And we move on to something else. As far as I know, nobody who has come before us has gotten any kind of a response that would encourage them to come back.
I'm seeing a lot of nods, and I feel like I'm outside of those. So I'm really curious if anyone wants to flesh that out a little bit, Ryan or others. If we're allowed to tell more.
I think it's the comment part that is the
Okay.
structure,
Yeah.
okay? That's the restriction. We're not commenting back to whoever the public that is commenting to us, whatever it is. And I think that's, where it comes up. It is very frustrating, both for us and for the person making the comment to us. However, per my response earlier, there's no way to structure that doesn't just sort of be a continuum and you never can get to what you have to do. And that's the frustration. I understand it all,
That's helpful.
but it is.
Yeah. Thank you for fleshing out. Is that where you were?
Yeah, and I'm in a little disagreement. I'm not sure that there's no way to accomplish what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I'm gonna challenge you to the
I
same.
don't know what it would be,
Yeah.
but I think that it's important that an individual get responded to. If they come up here and they start talking to us, they need a response.
Yeah.
And if they don't get it, they're not gonna feel part of this community.
So that's the frustration. There's a sense of an unmet need,
Yeah.
right? And again, Jim, like an unmet need maybe in both directions, right? I'm naming this, right, and maybe there's something that's important about that exercise of witnessing in any kind of democratic process. I think it's a really important, attribute to have a public forum of naming, and it can also feel like, but where's it gonna go, right? And you don't feel like you could say anything back. So that's where the frustration, and that felt sense of.
And I understand what's being
Unmet
said to the contrary. It
Yeah.
it can open up a can of worms, but yeah, I think it can be controlled.
Okay, thank you. All right, other folks?
We used to let, when we did public comment, for many, many years, we used to say that public comment was a time for the public to come and tell the board what they were thinking, what they were feeling, and letting us know that. But it wasn't a time for public dialogue, because a lot of times we might bring something up that we'd have to go back and do some research to have a real conversation with them on. So that was announced for a long time, and 2 board chairs back, I think it was, that stopped being announced, so that it was a change.
Yeah.
But it is awkward. I mean, it's not just here. I mean, you go to select board meetings,
Yeah.
during public comment, you bring up your concerns or whatnot, and they say thank you, and they continue on. Because it's their meeting, I mean, unfortunately.
I think if we go back to what we had said about what belonging means, it's coming to the, being seen and heard, and that outside of this body, I don't feel like we're set up for people to feel seen and heard
Yeah.
when it comes to the board and board work.
I thought it was.
Yeah, I had a comment about belonging in our community or the like broader school community, not necessarily the board, but I'm thinking of the words that come up are like tradition and status quo. I feel like our schools and even the community somewhat have like a set idea of how things go from season to season or year to year, and that new people with very different traditions or ideas that come into our community might not find space for their ideas or traditions to fit into that, because it's kind of like set.
This is how it's always been done, and I'm curious if there's been moments where that's become really clear, where someone who is newer to the community has expressed that sense of feeling like the way things are, or the way things are done, feels like a barrier to
Maybe.
how I can participate.
I experienced it a little bit coming into the school community as somebody who was homeschooled my whole life. And like, this is when the breaks are, and this is when people go on vacation, and and I was like, well, I go away for the month of December every year. I'm not gonna be in school then. And like, that didn't fit in very well. But it's like those kind of things where like different families have their own like ideas or traditions of what times are important or special to them, and that they do certain things, and that if yours don't align with this community's idea of what those things are, then it can feel like you're not, I don't know, like you're doing something wrong, or that your ideas or traditions aren't valued the same. And I imagine people that have like different religious beliefs might feel that way. I mean, mine is a family thing, but you know, it could be people that have different, whatever the reason is, might feel very much like they're not welcomed or seen or heard in our community.
Yeah, like calendar that's designed for, maybe like, or understood by a community in a certain way, because that's who participates or has participated traditionally.
Exactly.
Can I take that a step further? I worked in Burlington for a while, and there's lots of times where individual cultures collide with our values around education, meaning that in some cultures it's very important for males to be educated but not females. And here we say everyone gets an education, and so then there's the truant officer and whatnot. So you create a feeling of unsafeness for some and more safeness for others. And I think there's a larger piece that we here in Addison County may not necessarily see, but what is seen in other parts of the state.
Yeah, and how do we sort of foster full participation while also being responsive to community needs, family needs, right? And how do we create processes that we can acknowledge and name them even as we advocate for every child?
So participation and belonging are equal? Or what do we mean by that? Because that's.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I have my answer. I don't know if you want to offer your
Well,
thoughts.
no, I don't know. I mean, I thought that was sort of where we were going.
Yeah.
To participate. That's why I used the word respect early on, because if you're respected and you're participating, that's an important feedback that you get. But belonging, I don't know if that's equal to participation.
It's a great question.
Struggle with that.
It's a really, and I don't know how to choose between the two. I mean, if someone has had a chance to feel like they've really, I did a semester, I took student teachers to New Zealand, and they were all placed in New Zealand public schools. And I remember there's this one school that I got a tour of, and there's all these young guys, but they weren't in high school. They looked like they had like mustaches. And and they're like, I was just kind of chatting with them, and they're very nice, friendly guys. I was like, I asked each of them, what are you doing here? And one was like, here to see an old chemistry professor. One's here to watch a rugby game, and they don't have a dropout problem at this school. They have a like go somewhere else problem. Like it's become such a sense of community, right? It's become such a place of belonging. And so for me, in part, the reason your question is so compelling is because you could see belonging as a means to an end. Create belonging so that students will participate and graduate and go on to great things, right? But that is limiting in some ways because that implies that all we're really here to do is to provide an education. Now technically that's true, but are we also here to build a kind of culture as part of a community in which people want to live and work and thrive in? And so is belonging an end in and of itself? I mean, I don't have an answer. I'm compelled by the fact that you brought that up. Because and usually people don't even bring this up to me. They're just like, yeah, create belonging so people will participate and they can get the education they need. They can participate in the experience in these schools, right? But like in some ways, what we do for ourselves when we foster belonging, perhaps it transcends that in some ways. That really matters for the things that happen after school or the things that happen for educators that are going to spend generations of their life educating young people. So I do think that it's a really important kind of almost, I don't know, I'm seeing like a yin and yang as I think through that. And so I just want to invite folks to come into this wherever you'd like, but I just want to name, we've talked about the rigidity of procedure, compartmentalization, time and calendar, tradition and status quo, potential cultural collisions with the structures that we have. And then, what is the relationship between belonging and participation, right? So anything else that comes up, either as barriers or things you want to reflect on, Brian, and then Barb?
As an example, at Middlebury College, there's a group of around 12 Afghan young women. And I had an opportunity to work with them a little bit. And what they were telling me is they are taking advantage of every opportunity that's there, but they don't belong. That's a prime example.
Yeah.
They say that their experiences are not like the ones of the other students. They can't really get together and converse. So they really don't belong, and they will say that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings, Jim, I don't know if that speaks to what you were thinking about, but that's
Well, yeah,
a
but I
great
mean,
example.
That's
of-
the, they can participate, but they don't belong.
Yeah. And I'll say, like almost pulling hair out of my head, like, oh my God, you run the place. Like, this is your school. Like, I know those students and so many students that still see themselves a certain way. And yet, they're leading student government. They're in every club and organization. They have reshaped the place, yet some piece is missing for them to be able to see that. They still think, oh, it's the kids that are like student athletes. Those are the people that really belong. Right? And so they have the narratives they have. How do we disrupt that? It's a really important question about self-concept in relation to participation. And I don't even if we get to the solution part, I don't think we'll come up with the perfect one, but I really appreciate you naming it. Thank you. That was really clarifying.
Okay, I'm gonna bring it kind of back to us.
Yeah.
Right? And how, we work maybe together and things that might be barriers and can be at times is really, I'm trying to think of how I want to say it. It's listening without judgment, right? When someone's speaking, feeling that you can state an opinion without being judged for that opinion, right? That gets in the way of participation, belonging, and feeling like you're really, your view matters.
Yeah. Yeah. And in part, those moments of judgment can be particularly stinging because we're talking about public education.
Yep.
And I think at the root of why, I bet if I asked every single person in here to name why they're serving on the board, your values, your deeper values are going to surface about why this matters to you. And so in that place when you're trying to participate and you're being judged, it can feel moral or moralizing, right? And that does, it cools and chills and freezes open conversation. And you know, I appreciate you naming that. If it's one gift I wish every community could give themselves, that would be it. And you participate without moral judgment. So before we shift, because I want to move to the next piece here, how much time do I have, Barb? How am I doing?
I think I can give you like 20 minutes because we're ahead of schedule, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's exciting. Never ahead of schedule. I was late for my own wedding.
It's a
So,
barrier.
that's my barrier, timing. I'm not even wearing a watch. I just want to open it up one more time. If there's a barrier that hasn't been named.
I will say, I hear from folks that, like kids who struggle sometimes in our schools because they can't find their people.
Yeah.
And then at some point in their journey, if they do find their people, it's like,
Yeah.
changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Thank you. Yeah. I thought I saw you.
Well, I was just gonna sort of follow up, I think, some of the, you know, and I guess you could kind of group it all into like cultural, but that's an amalgam of like language, and so there's language barriers, and there's barriers with respect to like socioeconomic standing, I guess, or where folks sort of see themselves in the ecosystem, the community, and so I guess that in some ways can also sort of serve as barriers. I mean, even just on the Communications and Engagement Committee, you know, we are always trying to remember, like, when we're communicating something, just how sophisticated and how bulky and cumbersome is the language that we're using to communicate, because, you know, we have to be careful about making assumptions about how educated all of our stakeholders are and how much experience they have with different kinds of ways of communicating, computer versus non-computer, that sort of thing. And even their own personal experiences with education and how they feel about that experience and how that kind of can present a barrier to some families really coming forward and feeling comfortable standing in front of the board and addressing the board. So
I really appreciate that, and I see actually a connection between what Barbara and Mary are naming, because there's oftentimes layers of shame and humiliation and trauma that are at the root of language performance, of like how educated we sound, you know, what kinds of names people were called when they were children, right, or their families are sort of caricatured, right? And so all of those things are rooted in, you know, kind of the moral judgments. And you know, I think about that with, you know, as the child of, you know, immigrants who speak English as a second language, right? And the ways in which, you know, I had to witness people talking to my mother, like really slowly, or looking at me to translate the English sentence that she just said out loud to the person in completely understandable English if they were listening for the person's words and not all sorts of other stuff. And so that gets rooted into then how sensitive I might be around like a language policy. You know, this a simple example, when we started our kids in the school here, you know, Vermont has this sort of standard, if you write down that your child speaks more than one language, that they get a referral to, you know, a language specialist to aid, right? So it's sort of a deficit model, as though knowing two languages is inherently a deficit. There's no one to blame for this, except for my wife, who thinks that our son is bilingual. And it's a very ambitious attitude towards our son. Sorry, he could use some Urdu lessons. But the stuff that comes up for me, like I'm like looking at the form, getting hot, getting like defensive, protective, because there's years of trauma, right? In myself, in my body, in my memory as a parent, you know, and I'm having trouble regulating it, right? And so if I was gonna bring that up at a board, like, all of that's gonna be a part of how people show up. And so the question about procedure and making people feel heard are also related. Because if being judgmental is harmful, what does non-judgmental listening look like? What does it actually mean to make someone feel heard and seen in a non-judgmental way, in a trauma-informed way, in a way that understands cultures and communities are going to differ? So even if we're going to keep to the procedures we have, here comes the practice piece again, right? How do we show up? What do we need to practice, and I include myself in this, every time we show up to interface with the community? And that's why, again, like, as I said with the handout, everything for me comes back down to practice. Because of trauma, because of judgment, because of communities, because of the different ways that we're understood in terms of hierarchies, right? And whether or not we belong in this community. All of that gets translated through practice. And all of it can be transformational through practice, right? When I named that form to my child's teacher, they could have gotten really defensive. And been like, oh, that's just policy. Or they'd be like, oh, I'm sorry that impacted you the way it did. They could just start. It's just the first thing out of your mouth, right? What is that? Why does it matter so much? Why does the opening of the door matter so much? So with that, I don't want to get too much down that path right now, but I'm really grateful for the openness with which you shared with somebody who most of you have never met before, the barriers that you're confronting every time you sit in this room. I would like for us to pair off one last time. And here, we'll make the footnote the main text, right? So now the doers, you could breathe a sigh of energy and relief. And what is possible, right? And here what I mean is, what do you see as the school board's role in fostering belonging? You don't have to have a perfect, tidy answer to this. It could even be an attitudinal shift. It could be a question that you could be asking yourselves. It could be a goal or an aspiration. But with the same wonderful person or persons you were talking with, is just go back, take a couple minutes. What do you see as a role that the school board can play in fostering belonging? And that's with all of these barriers in mind, right? It doesn't have to address all of them, maybe even one. Does that sound okay? Okay, so fix the world's problems, you got 2 minutes.
I feel like this is a conversation.
Well, tolerance.
New meetings, but
By definition.
This is the same question.
Tolerance
It's like not every kid's gonna want to say.
I mean, it's one thing.
And I really wanted to.
Huh? They're not the same thing.
That generates diversity and either overcome diversity
for us to be effective.
whatever. There's all these ways to deal with it. But that creates your development.
Right.
Without those situations,
He's caught by procedure in his church, right? It's not accepted, so why would they have a priest who's homosexual at the same time tolerant, which is what he was. That only came up because I was reading it about 30 minutes ago. But I meant, I don't like whatever words you use.
There's opportunities for that.
I'm thinking about what
So that's what.
But that's
Right, what you doing? Does it change? Yeah, exactly.
high school in particular, how do we,
You can only drop out. You have to go to school. Right, you don't have a choice. After that, numbers
that
drop
are
out.
hard for
So
responsibilities.
How do we create an environmental, educational environment preparation for all the different career paths?
How would you recommend going
I know
about?
when I was in high school, there was very much a push for communication,
Sounds like
and that's not sustainable long term. Not everybody.
Becoming less so,
Right.
including financial, just plain up doesn't make sense to go to college if you become a,
There's always people
good money and one more, right? So I
But it doesn't make
mean, all
any
of that
sense.
doesn't make sense, but.
So how would we translate that? Those changes?
Make sure they respect your authority.
Nature of the road. And then we have to measure it. So we have to show. That's it. Public comment. It's very straightforward. What you do.
Yes.
Structure,
Discussion all the time.
He said somewhere.
But
One is more policy than ever.
I think there's absolutely no doubt that society has tried to encourage all the person who can stay in our country are geared to exactly
So we give folks about 30 seconds or so, just to find a place to pause.
He asks, tolerance is sort of a passive.
well, and I mean,
But it's really about how people tell us.
Advocacy, advocating
I remember
for
seeing a front, just that, I looked at it, oh, that's a good idea, you know, and so like, it's always, it works.
All right, so I'm gonna ask folks to come back, just so we can share in a little bit. And I kind of sort of eavesdropping a little bit, and I heard someone say, oh, this is a conversation we've been having, which is wonderful. And so if this felt incomplete, good. Like, I hope it continues to find a way to continue. But just kind of wanted to open it up and invite you in. So what are ways that you see the school board fostering belonging? What's coming up for you?
It's something, I mean, and I think Tricia and I are like on the same pathway because we've been on the communications and engagement committee, and it's something that is just an ongoing conversation that has all kinds of limitations and barriers that we're trying to sort of navigate. But I do think that we could be more successful as a board if we provided other meaningful ways, other meaningful avenues for engagement, and not just board meetings. I think there is this perception that the board meeting is the way to engage with the board, the best way. Or maybe it's the most powerful way, or maybe it's the way folks who have something to share feel the most powerful, but I'm not sure it's the best way. Certainly in terms of having like a two-way conversation. So I feel like for me, what is possible are for our board to contemplate other less formal ways to meet people where they're at in a manner that's commensurate with the board's collective bandwidth. And that's a really hard nut to crack.
Yeah.
So, but that's, I think there's some possibilities there, and ways to take advantage of already existing sort of social gathering places and structures that we can plug into. I think there's opportunities.
We're gonna have to go to Steve. We're gonna have to go to Steve next because I'm afraid we might lose him.
our battery's running low.
Yeah, and I don't know how much this is. There's a parallel here, but you know, Middlebury College it's a very hierarchical culture in terms of like, you know, not only itself seeing itself as an elite institution, but also I remember I had a student that came in. I served as the vice president on the president's senior leadership group. And it was like it was my first week there, and the student like after the meeting was like, it was an honor to have met you, sir. And I was like, all right, this is like this is something has to like, I've got to change how I'm showing up in this community if people think it's an honor to have met me. But the question I asked was like, what does it look like, right? So I tried like open hours, like coffee hours, and then eventually I landed on just like going to different spaces and just listening and participating. And so like it took a little bit of
I can't
practice.
hear the sound in the room.
Yeah.
Suddenly cut off.
Is that better? Can you hear us now?
Hopefully we can get it back.
Yeah, it's not recognizing the charge for some reason.
So I know, hopefully we'll get Steve back in a moment. But yeah, so I just wanted to invite folks either to speak to that or something else. So, Mary, what I hear you naming is alternative formats. What are other ways that might disrupt what appears to be this kind of like, kind of bifurcated model where dialogue isn't really an option? Other folks want to name what's coming up for you, things that we could foster?
Along with that, in my community, they're participating in this planning process for a new town plan. This would be the best way to describe it. And it came out loud and clear that they wanted a way to be able to call their board rep. And for a while, we had our phone numbers on the website, they'd come off. And so just putting our phone numbers back there, which has made people happy. I have no problems calling me, they don't abuse my phone number.
We have a board phone number, like Mary Heather checks the.
Oh, I know that we do, but
Yes.
they want their person's number.
Yeah.
I can count on my hands, people calling.
So I think what I talked about with Ellie a little bit was the idea of, right now we're saying, look, we have this space for you, come to this space, right?
Yeah.
You can come, we have this, take advantage of it. Versus either, as you're saying, going to them and saying, no, okay, you don't have to come here and fit into what we've put out here, but we're going to come to you. And inviting people in.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like, well, Ellie, if you have an issue, come see us. Versus like, Ellie, we would really like to hear from you. It would be great if you could come in and talk to us about whatever, right? And I think that it opens up the like, you don't know who it's easy to serve the people you're already serving, and it's hard to serve the people you're not serving, right? Like,
I feel like that meets two really important kind of possibilities. And one is functional, right? Like getting more voices in the room. And one is really rooted in the kind of symbolic role that any of these gestures represent, which is to take a posture of curiosity, a posture of...
That was my word.
that was Ellie's word!
Yeah. I mean, what an antidote to judgment, right? I mean, it's probably flying in the opposite direction to judgment, is curiosity, right? And taking that posture of inquiry and asking questions relentlessly, right? Is there a way in which the board is creating space together to foster questions? I started this evening with a question, right? And so look what happens when we ask questions. Do we give our community the ability to answer questions that are burning us up? Like questions are real for us that we're trying to answer. When does someone in the community get to participate in answering that question? What does the invitation to answer that question look like? Sometimes it could be in the moment. Somebody's naming something, and I know it's like because of the bifurcated structure, maybe it doesn't work. Is there a way to disrupt that, where someone's naming an experience? Can we meet that experience at least with curiosity? Even, Suzanne, to your point, we might not have the information in front of us. Do we have the curiosity in front of us? Can we arrive with that inquiry into somebody else's experience with school?
So I want to speak to that because that's when my word was curiosity, that felt like what we could do is be more curious, and we had some ideas, and I don't particularly like this term, but I said we should be aggressively curious. Like we should go out and find people and be like, we want to hear what you think, and we need ask you to come speak. And then the other, we had a concrete idea of something we could do within our structure that we already have, which is maybe on our website or even put a poster up here or something that is aimed towards the people that come to make a comment that says not only do we want to hear what you're here to tell us about, but we also invite you to tell us some solutions or ideas that you have for how to fix it, because that often is what we're left with burning here, is like people come with ideas, what's wrong, and we know that they must have a million ideas of what they'd like to see done to fix it or to do things differently, but there's not really the opportunity for us to say like, what could help, or how could we do things differently? We just hear what the problem is.
No, I love that,
So,
and
like, yeah.
Jamie, before I'm sorry, I just grabbed the check, I got excited, because this is literally how I phrased it, practicing a deep and stubborn inquiry about the lives we have not lived, right? That, like, how do we signal and make people feel seen just by being that curious about them? And what does that do to the relationship, right? Like, even if people don't leave with a resolution, they can leave with a relationship. Like, are we investing in relationship building through the board's processes and activities? Activities you're gonna do anyway. How are they fostering relationship as an outcome that you can assess, that you could look at and say, here's how we know we have made adaptations and restructured our approach and our process to foster relationship. Here's some of the outcomes we're seeing. Even giving yourself some room when you all are convening to ask and answer that question. How are we fostering curiosity? How are we fostering inquiry, right? And how are we making relationship the central feature of how we're building belonging in our work? Because honestly, like, half the reasons people come to see me, or more importantly, like, you know, President Patton, has nothing to do with anything we can do. It's like feeling like someone who's in a position of authority and power really sees and hears them. That affirmation, right? It goes a lot further coming from people that already have a sense of power projected on them from a community. That symbolic role is not to be messed with, because we see what happens when it's harmful, when people don't feel seen by, you know, administrators or school leaders. Right? Jamie, sorry. Thank you for your patience.
No, it's great. Well, we talked again, and Jason, the first thing, if I can bring up was, you know, well, obviously we're all talking about public comment. We could look at the public comment policy, which actually is already on our agenda for the next meeting. And I'll note that Laura, before you were on the board, as a citizen, brought up the public comment policy, which is why we started discussing it on the policy committee meeting, and she's now on that committee. So it's like there is some like way in which we can have that reciprocity already, which I think is really great.
Yeah.
And I agree, you know, with everything everyone's saying, that there's a way in which the structure is contradictory, and that it facilitates a certain level of getting business done and is in many ways exclusionary. And so what kinds of things can we do to meet, like there's some boards that have a part on their what do you call it, agenda, that's like 10 minutes of open reflection about anything that happened at that meeting, for example, which could be reflecting on a public comment, potentially, or something. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is, I know at some point, Karan, earlier you said, you know, policy making is not the thing that fosters belonging, it's about like practicing. But in some ways that policy making helps us practice the thing that creates a sort of a structure for that practice to happen. So it's something that I think a couple of us have been talking about that public comment thing in particular. We should discuss it as a committee and then as a board, and I think that's something very concrete that's sort of germane to this conversation.
I won't go too middle school teacher on you tonight.
It's fine.
One thing that I would love for us to even reflect on is even tonight, what is something that you heard someone else say that you would want to affirm, right? That you appreciated someone else naming and acknowledging. I think it's really also, again, in response to the issue of judgment, we've got to move in the opposite direction, right? Because it's such a judgment-based society, and I think the era we live in is so profoundly poisonous with moral judgment. I think social media has accelerated some of the worst attributes of that part of the human experience. And so I think in that era, we want to be more intentionally affirmative and assert a regard for one another. And so I think even building that in as a practice point to say, Jamie, I really appreciate you naming what you just did, and connecting those two pieces back to public comment with a vision, an imagination, an invitation. It doesn't have to be that long. It's something that we're practicing. And in that spirit, not just moment to moment, but I think a lot about openings and closings I co-facilitate with somebody a lot, and she always pauses before we start, 'cause she's like, I know he's gonna wanna start. And then at the end, she's like, I know he's gonna wanna close, because I like think a lot about openings and closings. And, you know, one of the things that I did at the opening was I asked you what your understanding of belonging is, right? Because I knew it was gonna go well, right? Like, I knew that's a really positive place to start with. No one's like, yeah, I don't believe in belonging, right? Even if they don't have it.
It's overrated.
They long for it. And so, you know, there's a model of inquiry known as appreciative inquiry that begins every kind of curiosity from strength. And so the other thing that if you are looking at whether it's the public comment or other models of inquiry is I would say that opening, I did a community-wide grassroots self-study years ago to support a city in its land development plans for, like, there were decade-long land development plans, and they had left out huge swaths of the community making this decision. So we did this grassroots kind of, you know, we used qualitative methods and interviewed folks. But the first question was, I'll put Middlebury in this just to give it this context, but if you woke up to a different Middlebury tomorrow, what would it look like? It's the first question. Before we talked about jobs or transportation or sidewalks or access, if you woke up, and I will tell you, the city put millions of dollars towards a lot of the recommendations that came out of the study. That answer was the most generative. It was the most generative in terms of actual data collection. We had specific things that came out of that. And that, I think, reminded me of your curiosity, but like curiosity from a really affirmative place to start out with. What is, if you woke up to a different ACSD tomorrow, what would it look like? Is such a profound invitation for folks that are also getting a signal from you that you're interested in their ideas, their vision. And look, like it or not, you are considered the visionaries, right? You are the envisioning body for this district. Whether you signed up for that or not, right? That is who you are. And so when the envisioning body is like, what is your vision? You know, I'm just thinking about the relationship that that fosters. So I know I'm probably over time. But I want to close, oh, sorry, Jamie, and then I'll close.
Well, okay, I don't want to interrupt you, sorry. I'll just say one more thing. I mean, while you're here, maybe something to think about for the future. You may know we have this strategic plan, 5 years. And one of those goals is to increase belonging. At some point, it would be interesting to hear from you how you think people might measure or study that. Like, we want to sit here a couple years from now and be like, we have successfully increased belonging. And how will we know?
Yeah.
You know, like, what will we be able to point to say? And, you know, I can think of some things, but this conversation makes me think you have some ideas too. And maybe not now, but in the future, it might be interesting to hear a little bit about that.
There's a much longer answer, but I would say that, like, this goes back to Jim in a kind of ironic way, is metrics around participation. Mm-hmm. Who's applying for jobs here? Who's enrolling in what programs and honors, et cetera? Mm-hmm. You know, what curriculum is being accessed? So participation is not the end point. Right, now I'm really going to emphasize that. But it is a way of measuring some degree of how belonging is articulating itself in a community. But there's a much longer set of things that I would love for us to explore together. Sure. Because, yeah, when you look at it, it can sound like a super fluffy thing, right? But I will say, as I look at my team and who stayed on my team over these last 2 years, and it's been a tough 2 years in higher ed. It's you couldn't pay anyone enough. But if they feel like they belong, they've stayed and they've thrived. And so that's data too. Like, retention becomes data, right? So I don't want to say that's like, that's the only answer, but a big answer is actually looking and assessing participation on multiple platforms. Okay, so thank you so much. I want to do one last thing. I'll start with Jamie, and you can skip if you're not ready. I'm just going to ask you to say just one word, 2 max, that you're thinking or feeling as we close out. And I will go ahead and pass it to you, and you can pass if you're not ready.
One word?
I know.
Gratitude.
Interesting. Curious.
Hopeful. Energized.
Grateful.
Can we repeat words?
Yes.
Okay, curious.
Yeah, grateful, pleased.
Optimistic.
Questioning.
Reflecting.
Grateful.
Pensive.
Paradoxical.
I like it.
There at the end, sorry. Yeah.
No one saw it coming. I like it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Can Steve hear us?
You can hear us now, yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, conflicted.
I almost said that.
Thank you all so much for your
Yeah.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, thank you.
So much.
And we'll be seeing you again. We're
Yeah.
gonna work out, really how, with us going forward, how he can help us, right? And do this periodically, not just have it like a retreat or something, but how can we periodically dedicate maybe some board time to do what we did tonight or something similar. So stay tuned. And ideas, well, think about it, because at the board meeting, we can think about those ideas as well. Based on today, what would we like to do and how would this better be structured, that kind of thing. So that'd be awesome. Thank you
all.
so much.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank you.
evening.
Yeah.
And then back to you.
Okay, every, I think annually, the Chilton Fund exists to support students in our schools, and with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you. So we're a little bit late on our annual McJilton Fund presentation. In the interest of time, we have a choose your own adventure option. Jen and I have a very short PowerPoint that we could do that might double the allotted 5 minutes to 10. If folks would like a background in what McJilton is, where it came from, etc. Or I could read the memo and walk you through it that way.
So what are folks feeling?
Read the memo.
Yeah, so go for the memo, and if people have questions, we can explore that.
Sounds good. So Jen and I are both here to answer questions, and the memo should hit all those major highlights. McJilton Fund is a trust fund dedicated to aid the educational interests of all Middlebury Elementary School students. Per the ACSD Articles of Agreement, this and any school-based fund will be used in accordance with the specified conditions of the endowment. For McJilton, each year a distribution of 4.5% of the previous 12-quarter average is used to fund various activities as described in the proposed budget prepared by Mary Hogan's principal, Jen Kravitz. This distribution historically occurs in the spring and uses the calendar year as the marker of the 12 quarters. So year ending in December, we would take the 12-quarter average of 2023, 2022, 2021 to get our average for what the spring of 24 distribution is. This year, the 4.5% formula grant amount is $41,137.77. Due to some unbalancing factors such as COVID, the cycle of distribution and Mary Hogan's budgeting have fallen a little bit out of sync in recent years. And so this year, with this distribution, we're trying to realign the two so that when we present the budget in the spring, it's the budget for the coming year, and when we present when we ask for the distribution in the spring, it's not to fund any activity in the current year, it's all to fund forward to the next year. We're just sort of trying to go from being half behind to being all the way ahead. So this year's funds will be combined with the remaining balance of the last distribution, which is $16,927.71, for a total of $58,065.48. That amount is then going to be used to fund all of FY24 and FY25 expenses. That'll get us on track. In the spring of FY25, a year from now, will request the next distribution, which will be used in its entirety towards FY26 programming. So the budget for FY26 will be presented in 25, and we'll go from there. This will complete the realignment process, whereby each distribution corresponds to a full school year. We therefore recommend that the board move to authorize the transfer of funds in the amount of $41,137.77 from the McJilton Investment Fund into the National Bank of Middlebury McJilton checking account, which would be the recommended motion.
So let's make a motion and a second, and then we can have a period of questions before we take action. So, will someone make a motion?
I'll make a motion to transfer, that we approve transfer of $41,137.77 from the Midgilton Investment Fund to the National Bank of Middlebury's Midgilton checking account.
Excellent. And a second.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Discussion, questions? Chip?
Just one question. In the budget for the coming year, if we don't know the amount that's generated, how do we budget for that? I guess that's my, or do we know that when we're doing the budget?
So the distribution typically comes in March, and since I arrived at Mary Hogan, what's always been strange to me, and this is like goes back when I have historic documents, is like in March, they would propose for the following school year what they would spend it on, but you still have but in March, to be honest, things change between March and September,
No,
right?
I know.
And so I think the hope is to get back on that, we're just we've been off, so we pay for part of the year in one pot and part of the year in another pot.
Right.
So we can anticipate, we know what was distributed this March, right, Matt? So it's that amount that he's proposing, 41, right? So that will cover the end of this year and then all of next year. And Matt and I have worked out a plan. It's a little tight next year, but we have a plan for how to kind of generally cover things with the McJilton as well as some other funding sources. So we know kind of how to make it through with our typical expenses through the end of next school year.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't need to know the detail. That's
Yeah.
just this realignment and that the whole thing of
Yeah.
budgeting.
Yeah, so the way that, an example of being out of alignment is this spring, getting a distribution, we're funding the tail end of FY24 plus all of 25. But if we weren't funding all of 25, it would be, we're funding the tail of 24 and the head of 25, and then running out of money in the winter and needing a distribution in the spring to fund the tail of 25.
Yeah, okay.
And so this way, we're gonna take a distribution, and it's gonna fund the head and the tail.
Right. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but I think that there was money in the fund when I arrived at Mary Hogan and plus the pandemic.
Right.
Really.
Which meant we didn't go to Kuwait and we didn't
Right.
do things like that.
The practical impact of this is that the distribution we got in March will fund this current year's Kuwaitan trip as well as next year's Kuwaitan trip, which is wonky because it's about $20,000 to send Mary Hogan kids to Kuwait.
Jamie?
I feel like I should know this, but does the McJilton Fund have a end? Will it ever?
No, there's a provision about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, about there are two different funds. There's the regular fund that gets distributed every year, and then there's this investment fund where you can use some principal to an end. If we wanted to do a whole new playground, we could come propose for it. There isn't an end in the documents I've seen.
There's not 10 years from now, it expires or something.
No.
It
No,
started in 1950.
It started in 1950 as a $6,000 request to the school district to be kept under fund management. by what was then called the Prudential Committee of the school board and a trustee from the bank.
Impressive.
That money was managed very successfully, so the $6,000 seed is now over $1 million fund.
Wow.
And the 4.5% distribution is just sort of like the interest, right? That, you know, you're
What year did you say it started?
1950.
Wow,
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah.
Predating Mary Hogan.
Yeah.
Conservative also, obviously.
Any other questions? Suzanne?
So you would still come to us though in the spring with what you're planning on using the funds for as what's happened in previous years? Or would the board know, doing this, not know from year to year what the funds are being used for?
Yeah, so we haven't really varied since I've been at Mary Hogan, any significant funding source. It's typically always been, and it could change, but QAiden, PE enrichment activities like rock climbing and Project Adventure, any artists and residents, if we have money for that in the fund. Typically we don't, but those are expensive at Mary Hogan. Connection with Town Hall Theater and Shakespeare is elementary. We have added Everybody Wins as well as the all-school diversity read-alouds in the past, but those are like $4,000, so pretty small amounts relative to the fund. So I wouldn't imagine straying far from that. I would imagine having a proposal as we've had in the past. But I also look to Matt for like guidance on how to think about that.
Yeah, in the sense that because of the size of the fund, the distribution is pretty stable in that like $40,000 ballpark. There's the costs are known costs that go into how that budget gets spent. There's never going to be a year where you know, there's a tremendous injection of new money to develop a new budget for, or a shortfall that allows or forces one of the programs to potentially be cut. So.
Other questions? Are we ready for the question? Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to authorize the transfer of funds in the amount of $41,137.77 from the McGilton Investment Fund into the National Bank of Middlebury McGilton checking account. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last item under the superintendent's report are personnel items. There's a list of appointments and resignations there. 3 of the appointments are for elementary principals that went through almost a month-long hiring process to find 3 solid people for those positions. And I did want to make a special note, because I've been asked this question a few times about Jenny Urban and her placement at Bridgeport. That's how the results of the information gathering landed. And I also want to mention that to her great credit, Jenny Urban didn't want to be appointed to a building. She wanted to go through the process, and she did go through the process and was very successful in that process, because she had the attitude that if it's not handed to her, then she earned it, and she earned it. And that's important to know. Those are the kind of people you want on board. Those are the kind of people you want as your principal. A lot of integrity there. I really, really, really respect that. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the appointments and resignations as listed.
Would someone like to make that motion?
So moved.
Okay. And who seconded? Jamie. Okay, Jamie. Any discussion, questions?
We're looking good for, I know this is the time of year where we get a lot of resignations just because it's that time of year. Are we on track to be in a good place to start off next year?
In a lot of places, yes. One area of concern is speech pathology. But we're not unique in that situation. We're probably gonna have to do something a little bit creative there to meet students' needs in that area.
Those are the two SLP resignations at the bottom of the list.
Yeah, we're down more than 2, I think. Maybe 4, 5. We're down 5 for next year. So that'll be a challenge. And we're already discussing ways to be creative about how we fill those needs, because the bodies aren't there.
Right.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I guess.
Go ahead.
I
Tricia.
have noticed what seems to be a fair number of school counselors leaving the district this year. Has there been any follow-up or exit interview information?
I can share that one person is moving out of state for personal reasons. That's the only one that comes to mind right now. Honestly, I can't remember what the reasoning was or where they're going, or other jobs they may be taking.
And Mary Heather.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, we had a couple board members make this comment in the past about questioning about exit interviews and when would be the appropriate time to have an executive session to get sort of a summary report of exit interview findings. What are your thoughts about timing on that? Would that be like June? Would that be August? Just given the season?
Well, without a July meeting, I think June might be too soon. Although
Okay.
it could be possible, because they're offered exit interviews. Many of them aren't interested.
Right.
Some are. So I guess you're looking at June or August,
Okay.
since there's no July meeting.
Okay. I guess I just put burn for you just to keep it on the executive committee's
Yep.
radar.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Any other questions? Are we ready for the question? Okay, the motion is to authorize the transfer of funds in the amount of 41
No,
million.
no,
Oh,
we're on-
oh my God, I'm sorry.
Be good for the
Yeah.
Mary Hogan, but we're not gonna.
Yeah, no, we're gonna do it again. I am so sorry.
Got ADK this year.
All those agreeing to the appointments and resignations as submitted, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yep.
I'm so sorry. It was highlighted in yellow, and for some reason I went back and reread the same thing. Is there anything else?
That concludes the superintendent's report.
Excellent. Moving on, reported the chair. The first item that we have on the agenda here is board self-evaluation results on the AOE rules, right? And last month, if you remember, or last 2 weeks ago, I had presented the basic results of the survey and the evaluation that went out. And there was a little bit of discussion on, potentially how we would select those rules that we want to take on. And I wanted to open it up tonight for some ideas from you guys, because it's the board, not me, or the executive committee that really is responsible for deciding what they want to take on. And if you had some idea of an approach that would be good, we have the spreadsheet that I shared with you, so you can kind of sort the list different, based on the different columns. One option that I thought of, that I can just throw out there to just start the conversation was, I could create a form, a Google form, where you could rank order your top 3, 4 items or 5 items that you think we should work on, and then accumulate the results and see which ones really rise to the top is one idea. But if you have other ideas, let me know, and I'd be happy to try to help facilitate it. Yes, Jason.
Is this part of the retreat on Saturday too, or no?
I would like to be able to have, like if there's something we can do ahead of time, so we don't have to spend, like if in fact I'm creating a form, I could send out the results ahead of time, so then it would be a matter of sharing the results of where people identified, right, the top 3 or so, and decide as a board that, yeah, where do we go down on the list? We'll do 1, we'll do 2, whatever, instead of spending a lot of retreat time, because we have a pretty busy agenda. Mary Heather?
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think the idea is to have our selection as a board identify whatever rule or rules we want to incorporate into our work plan.
Yep.
And have that work plan complete around retreat time
Or after.
shortly
It's gonna be after.
So that, as we break for July and we come back in August, we're ready to go with our work plan, which includes, which rules we're gonna tackle. So preferably, we have our selection before going and not spend retreat time on that.
Right.
1 year we're looking at, right?
Yes, yeah,
year,
right. And once we've implemented a rule, obviously, we need to continue to follow it. But it takes maybe additional energy and thought to actually implement it to begin with, right? And so that's kind of the part we're looking at, taking it on, making sure that we're implementing it properly. And then next year, we can identify, the next whatever on the list. So looking at an approach where possibly I have input of your thoughts of what we should implement, and then I could summarize that and then present that, and then at the board retreat, we would then identify how far down the list that we would go, and depending on the items there and how much effort it's going to take to implement them, and what else is coming out of the retreat, right? So, go ahead, Jamie.
I like your spreadsheet idea.
Okay, so what I'm thinking about is, I will do a Google form or something where you can just list your top 5 or something like that. And I'm not gonna retype, enter all of those. You have the spreadsheet, you have all the rules, and you have my spreadsheet that I created. So from there, you would just grab the ones in order. Does that make sense? Instead of me creating a form of them all on. Cool? Yes.
Is it gonna be easy for you to tally the results?
I think it will.
Okay.
Yeah, there's only 13 of us, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll put it in a spreadsheet to tally it.
Okay.
Suzanne?
I was just gonna say, I think we should really start with, looking at our top 3.
Sure.
And because we've got a lot of work starting up on the board with this equity plan and whatnot, and there's only so many of us, and there's so many nights to the month. We don't want to bite off more than we can chew and do a poor job. We want to bite something off that we can do a really great job at.
Yeah. And so I think, I'll leave room for maybe 5, but in the meeting, we'll identify where we draw the line, right? Just because folks brought 5 doesn't mean we're gonna, as a board, select 5. We may only select 1, or we'll select 2 that rise to the top. Does that make sense? That way, if there's variation of what people think, having a few more might help give the preference. Excellent. Okay, so I will get that done over the next day or so that you can get it back to me before the retreat and I have time to summarize it. It shouldn't take that long. Retreat update. The agenda, I had sent it to Darcy today. I don't believe she got to actually warn it. I'll make sure it gets warned tomorrow. It basically just lists the topics. We're not going to do a Zoom. It does need to be warned, though, as a retreat. And there will be public comment. It's really focused on board education and, really working with our central office leadership team on Saturday. So I'm going to just ask, are there any questions? I've been giving you updates as we've gone. It's at Hannaford Careers Center. It starts at 9:30. There will be some food out a little bit before that. We good?
Which room?
208.
208?
It's the one up on the second, where we,
Second floor.
the second
halfway
floor,
down the hallway on
where we've been,
Yeah, I mean, it's the same number as this, so
Yeah.
that's why,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
and with the nice comfy chairs, which is why I wanted to go there. Okay. If a question comes up, please, just reach out to me and ask. It'll be all good. And then Mary Heather already brought up the last item on here is really the work plan update. I did send out a copy of the work plan as it exists at this point in time. You'll notice if you scan through it that it has all of the AOE rules on there, because at some point, we'll collapse those down, the ones we're not going to work on it. But you can take a look at it, see what's on there, see how it would impact any committee work that you're responsible for. And if you see some changes you would like made, please, if you have feedback, let me know, and I will capture that. And the executive committee, we've worked on it, but it's a board document. It's a board, so we're just trying to get the draft there to really help facilitate getting the work done. And we'll spend a little bit of time on that as well. My thought is that there may be some additional items that come out of the retreat, besides, with the strategic plan implementation. So I wouldn't consider the work plan complete, by the board retreat, but hopefully the meeting thereafter, the first board meeting thereafter, we should be able to finalize it. And Chip,
What do we need to bring anything with us? I meant documents or anything else?
for the retreat, maybe your copy of your strategic plan, that we passed, but other than that,
Okay.
yeah, I think we're good. Excellent. So up next is report of the board. And what I'd like to start out with is the negotiations. And Steve, why don't you cue us off on this one or kick us off on this one?
Yeah, sorry for the voice, but my preferred method to move forward on this is to make a motion to accept the contract between the school board and the Addison County Educators Association recently ratified by the teachers for the 2024 to 2027 school years. And that if there's any questions after we make that motion, that we can discuss it then.
Sure.
But right now, we should have done this last board meeting, but there were some questions about whether the proper contracts had been signed and ratified, and it turned out that they actually hadn't. And so it's probably a good thing that we waited, but now all the ducks are in a row, and everything has been put to rest. So I think we're ready to go forward. The teachers have already ratified the contract, and as I said before, there really isn't. We have already made an agreement with them. This is for the most part a formality. So I'd be happy to make that motion.
Go ahead.
Or
Go
someone
ahead.
else can.
Why don't you make the motion?
Okay, I move that we accept the negotiations between the school board and the Addison Central Education Association for the agreed upon terms for the 2024 to 2027 school years.
Okay. Okay, and Jamie seconded it. Any questions? Jason?
When do we get to see the agreement?
It is, let's see, I don't know the short answer to that. When we take these modifications back, we change the actual contract and put it into the contract that exists. What we have right now is a tentative agreement. It just shows you what the changes are. And I don't know how helpful that would be to anybody. I have a copy of it. I'm pretty sure that Tim and Matt have copies of it. I believe the rest of the The committee members have it, Chris Leopold definitely has it. And if the board would like to see it before we integrate it into the rest of the contract, that's, there's nothing wrong with that. We just didn't see any reason to make copies of it available tonight, so.
And last week, 2 weeks ago, when we did go into executive session, didn't you really identify all the changes pretty much as that were made?
Yeah, I tried to identify all the money changes, which seemed to be the most significant things, the length of the contract and any kind of changes in employment, how we handled certain things that would have to deal with contracts. Everything else were minor language changes, and that would be really the only thing that you're missing. The document is roughly 12 pages long, and much of it is taken up by the things that I did update you on last time.
Is it Jason?
Is this not a public document?
Yes.
It will be.
Once it's ratified.
Once it's ratified, yeah, once we vote on it, it will be a public document.
Yes,
John
yes.
Flowers has already asked me to send him a copy of it, which I am perfectly willing to do. It's just, I think the last corrections got made this morning. So somebody found something that shouldn't have been in there. And it wasn't in either of the proposals. We don't know how it got into this tentative agreement. And both the teachers agree. So we have the finalized copy now.
Yeah, so, yeah, it will definitely be a public document, once we've voted on it. Ally?
I just want to comment that it does feel kind of odd to be asked to vote on something that we haven't been allowed to look at.
So as Steve had indicated, the negotiations committee is what negotiates the agreement. And we're not going to be making changes. And he has kept us informed. This is how the process has worked since I've been on the board. I've only gone through one other negotiation, which was the first year I was on the board. Chip, Suzanne, you've been,
It's always been this way.
yeah,
Because it's negotiated, because until both sides have ratified it, you can't put it out to the general public, so that.
in case it changes and,
So tomorrow it becomes public.
yes, yes. If we vote on it tonight.
And per Ellie's comment, I understand what you're saying, but so much of negotiations is this give and take, give and take, give and take. Many things disappear in exchange for somebody else disappearing, taking something else off the table. So it becomes really complicated for the board to be, quote, totally involved with the process, and actually impossible.
I
If
guess-
you want to be, you can be on negotiations committee.
I guess I had just imagined that at the end, we would all get to review it, and then I could choose to vote no to it, even if everyone else passed it, or to abstain from voting or something if I felt like I didn't agree with
So
it.
you still can, based on, because Steve
Not
in
knowing.
executive session.
Based on what
went through
Steve has
all the
reported.
money and such.
Yeah,
You can still
based-
vote whichever way you like.
Yeah. Steve?
So if you want to get down to the procedural brass tacks of it, when the board creates the negotiation committee,
That's
they
what I was
empower
gonna say.
them to conduct negotiations.
Right.
So it's not really like the rest of the board has to be or can be involved in the rest of the process. So it's kind of like when you charge a committee to hire the superintendent, for example, that they go out and they do their work and they come back and they tell you what they've done. And the only reason that you would reject that is that if you fully reject the entire contract. And that puts us in dicey legal positions because it is a binding contract between us and the association when we sign those tentative agreements. And it really isn't, I understand, as a person who, says, I want to be involved in this, I want to know what I'm signing, I completely get it. The problem here is that negotiations are very much an adversarial, as friendly as you want to make them. They are adversarial, and anything that happens outside of that bubble could be used to prejudice that whole process. And so the idea is that you appoint negotiators that you trust, who are going to have the board's best interest at heart. The teachers do the same thing. They don't get to pick. They pick their negotiators, and those are the people that come up with the contract. And so I understand it's an uncomfortable position, and I fully sympathize with you on that. But it is, in fact, the legal nature of what we do. So I can't give you any better explanation than that. Sorry.
Thank you, Steve. That was exactly what I was going to say. When we formed the negotiations committee, we basically empowered them on our behalf to negotiate the contract. Jamie?
I think sometimes people look at this a little bit different, and they say we are basically ratifying the process,
Yes.
not voting on the document.
Right.
Which is something we can't change really like this now anyway. And so, where in some ways whatever we're gonna do in a minute will be to ratify that process, not positively associate ourselves with specifics of the contract.
Very well said.
Yes. Thank you, Jamie. Did that help? Yeah, okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so are we ready for the question?
Sure.
So now Mary Heather, could you do me a favor and read what Steve said so I get the wording right?
Yeah, accept the contract between ACSD and ACEA on the ratified master agreement for agreed upon terms for the 2024, through 2027 academic years.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have a motion?
No.
We have a motion.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed by saying nay? Any opposition? Any opposed? Any abstentions? I'm sorry.
I'm abstaining
Okay.
on account of the whole.
So it has been ratified. It has been approved. And sorry for my words getting all mishmashed.
Can I make one?
Yes.
Maybe Steve, or you could see who is the right person, could share it with the board when it is officially a public document.
At this point, it is a public document, and I have an electronic copy of it, which I could share with the board. It is my intention, as I said, after this meeting to share that with John Flowers. So I'm already going to be creating an email, and I'll just send it to the board email.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, next, communications and engagement.
Yeah, I feel like we covered a chunk of what we were going to talk about already. But yes, the communications and engagement committee is struggling to figure out the best way to communicate and engage with our public. We did want to bring before the board that as a committee, we do feel like the current public comment procedure is a barrier to our stakeholders. It's not meeting the goals that we're hoping to meet, and we would like the full board to take that on into consideration. We also agree as a committee that we need to up our presence in the 9 schools, whether that is by reinstating our school board meeting rotation travel, or if we elect not to do that as a board, that something else would need to be created to kind of fill that gap. Beyond that, we're really trying to figure out meaningful, valuable, sustainable methods. And sustainable is the one that we often get
In trouble.
get caught up on.
Would this, would you prefer, or would the committee like this to be put on the agenda and we have a discussion?
Which this?
You know, this engagement and taking it on as a board? Is there some kind of a dialogue that the committee would like to orchestrate? And we could put that on the agenda?
Well, I do think we need to make a decision as a board whether we will reinstate our traveling meetings, right? And so whether that is best happens at our retreat or best happens in one of our publicly warned meetings, I leave to the executive committee.
Okay.
But I do think that board decision should happen and that
Sure.
conversation needs to happen. I would like to see, and our committee would like to see, full board discussion on our public comment procedure.
Okay.
Again, I don't know if that is best placed within the retreat or a warned meeting.
I think the retreat is really full.
Yep.
So what my suggestion would be that, the committee kind of think about how to frame the discussion and that we put it on an agenda that's coming up over the next, in June or
Yeah.
early August, whatever.
I think that it would be good to have in June or August. It's been about a year since we adopted our current procedure, and it's
Absolutely.
a good time for us to, I think, look back and reflect on,
Yep.
on what
Yep.
that experience has been like.
Right, and maybe just think about how you want to frame it, and do we bring in policy, with that as well, so that we structure that discussion period effectively to get what we need. Mary Heather?
I'm sorry to add this, I don't know if you had this on your punch list, but also one of the things was we had sort of resurrected this, I guess I'd call it like a communications plan / procedure document. That was something that the committee had kind of looked at again. It sort of fell to the side when the board worked on other matters. And so there will be hopefully some coordination with policy committee on that, but I think that is, another sort of vehicle by which we could structure the agenda item when we get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And-
we had-
And one question that I have is, it's not too early to put a plan in place even for the budget discussions and have that dovetail with finance committee and really the process, right? So I know that there was waiting, to have the budget, so that then all of a sudden end of January, we're rushing, trying to figure out how do we communicate and dialogue with that. So I think if we need to think about what are the requirements associated with having a communication path and factor that in our plan with approving the budget as well, so that we can do both. Jamie.
Just one thing to you guys, as I said before, we promise here, our committee will be talking about this policy on June 4th. It would be great if someone wanted to come and make a public comment at that meeting. Or I don't actually know what the rules are about engaging with us, but it'd be great to just have a normal conversation about it, and to the extent that's possible. And so, like with the format, with the rules or whatever. So I will email you guys, and you can see if your schedule aligns, and it'd be great to hear what you have to say, because I think we're on the same.
You mean us?
No, I mean the communications engagement.
Oh,
Are you on that?
okay, I don't know who you're talking to.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I meant,
Yeah.
who's on it? You?
There's
Yeah.
There's five of us.
Five,
yeah.
okay, great.
So probably one.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the only thing
I can
you have to
participate
avoid is to have a
too.
quorum of the full board,
Yeah.
so that we don't have to warn it as a board meeting.
Right, okay.
Right.
Oh,
I'm
one
on
of
both.
those.
So
Okay.
she's kind of our resident.
Oh, good. Never, okay.
Venn diagram.
Yes.
That was,
Okay, so we'll have it covered. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
yeah,
Yep.
excellent.
Great.
Okay, anything else on communication engagement? Thank you. Facilities.
Facilities Committee met on the 15th, mainly focused on the asked list of summer projects that the facilities crew is going to take on this summer. The big one is the A-Wing HVAC renovation at Mary Hogan that will commence on June 19th and be done on August 23rd. And as Bruce, the backup plan was, if it's not done on August 23rd, and he says, quote,
It will be done. You heard it here.
I did get a comment from the public that the middle school parking lot desperately needs attention and care. Just to note that in the public.
Thank you.
You can start a paving company.
Yes. Next, finance.
Finance met on the 6th of May. Major discussion was around the third quarter report. This is probably the most significant, important report because it's close to the end of the year, but not completely at the end. And so we can sort of see where we're at and what's been happening much better than the first quarter report. And it looks like most things are in order. Looking at both expenses and encumbrances and anticipated spending to the end of the year, would project it would be about a 1.5 million surplus for fiscal year '24. It's about where we often are. The other discussion it was sort of an educational discussion about grant and fellowship expenses generated from us reading bills and seeing some of that money that we are expending. And yet, in fact, it's not necessarily public funds that we're expending. We're writing the check, yes, but that money has come from somewhere else. So we heard, some discussion from Matt, explanation as far as grants and federal or state monies, which are really a very specific use, a very high level of restriction and formulated. And then there are some title grants which are competitive. And then there are fellowships which are basically individual and competitive. And yet, and this generated honestly out of seeing an expense for hotels in some foreign country, okay? We go, what? And so that's how this came up. And so this gets placed through the finance committee and we approve them. But in actual fact, the funds are coming from different places. The third had to do with budgeting parameters. And with Dr. Baker coming on momentarily, we really thought over this next few months, certainly Dr. Baker and Matt will be trying to come up with some parameters, looking at it almost from a zero budgeting increase, even though that's, I think, not possible, but yet it's where you'd want to start, knowing full well a lot of the headwinds that are going to be happening come this next year.
With the yield bill.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else, Chip?
No.
Okay, thank you. Policy, Jamie.
I made a mistake. I did not, I sent Darcy a confusing communication which resulted in the two policies we were supposed to bring to the board not being on the agenda in time. So the policy committee got done reviewing A20, which is about board meeting agenda preparation, C9, which is a big wellness policy, which you've heard about before. So those two will be on the agenda for next meeting to discuss and hopefully, what is the right word, vote on or ratify. And then, as I said, next time we'll be talking about the public comments and inviting Dr. Baker again to talk us about Ed's policy.
Yes. And so for the future, just send that to me, like by the Monday before the board meeting, when we set the agenda, and we'll make sure it's on there. We'll actually, because if we're going to be,
Right.
there's a process,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So we need to put it out so that
Yeah.
it's warned, how many days? How many? 10. 10 days ahead of the vote.
Okay.
So we can get it on the agenda next time, and then the actual vote on action on it would be the following board meeting.
Okay, my apologies.
No worries, oh, no worries,
No, I
we're
got
all
it, yeah.
learning.
Jamie, I'm sorry, can you can you just repeat the first policy that you guys did? I got C9 and wellness policy, what was the policy before that?
A20.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that's for any committee, right? If you need an agenda item, send it to me. I'll share it with the executive committee as we're forming the agenda. CPAC, do we have an update on CPAC?
I think the biggest thing for CPAC is next Tuesday, so a week from today, they're having their annual meeting. It's going to be 2 parts. The first part starts at 5 and goes till 6, and it is very business oriented to do with the revoting on board members of the CPAC and discussing priorities, setting maybe a work plan. And then from 6 to 7 is going to be a community event focused on the topic of fear, safety, and behavior in schools. A school psychologist, not from the district, will give a presentation on the topic, and then we'll have a community discussion, which will hopefully be facilitated by someone from CSAC. So next Tuesday from 5 to 7 at the high school.
What's the date?
It's the 4th. So if you are not on policy, you can go to it.
Oh, we're done by then.
Yeah. Excellent. And, multiple board members can go to a presentation as long as we're not there to do board business. We're there to listen. So we can all go there. Middlebury Community Television, I don't have an update. We did have a board meeting earlier this month. Parks and Rec,
No update, we haven't met.
okay. And the Hannaford Career Center. I look at Steve, Tricia.
Steve, you're welcome to add anything you'd like, but I think just in general, they are doing the same sorts of tasks that we are working on our board right now. So they're finalizing their negotiations agreements and just finished up the evaluation, like review, but that's not right.
Yeah.
So very similar sort of work being done.
And I was unable to attend the last board meeting because I was taking care of a negotiation meeting for the support staff. So I was not in attendance. So I really, Tricia is the better source of information on that one.
Excellent.
Ellie, what were you?
They're having their graduation ceremony on Wednesday night at Middlebury Union High School's auditorium at 7, I believe.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's tomorrow. Okay. And so that finishes up the report of the board. Next on our agenda is public comment on any topic. There's no public in the room. Is there anyone on Zoom wishing to make a public comment? Okay, seeing none. Next on our agenda is adjournment. Can I have a motion?
Before we
Yes?
adjourn,
Yes.
I'd just like to take a moment to thank Dr. Williams for chaperoning us, ushering us through the year. He has taken on an awful lot over this past year. I'm very grateful for him and for his service, and he will be missed. And after the meeting, there's cake.
Yay.
Cake.
She's very sneaky. Good for you, Suzanne. Chip.
I'd like to also comment on that. Tim, I mean, we had to sort of wrestle him into this position.
Literally.
After he did a good job at Career Center. And I really appreciate him doing that. I've appreciated very much his experience, his pragmatism, his steadiness, quiet way of going about it. And obviously that speaks to why he was a probably very successful superintendent at the districts that he was in for the long years of his full career. So I appreciate it. We will miss your work. You guided us well, hopefully to find Dr. Baker here and to have a great transition. So thanks.
You're welcome,
Very
thank you.
much.
Yeah, thank
Very
you.
kind, thank you.
Jamie?
I'll say one thing as well. I ran into my own high school principal last weekend in Pennsylvania and knew Dr. Williams from Pennsylvania. And so we had an interesting little discussion about that. So,
I'm not sure you should keep talking.
anyway, I just want to share that publicly. Thanks.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Principal Burkhart. I don't even know his first name, but he's a great guy. We knew who you were. So,
Yes.
It's usually not a good thing when the principal knows who you are.
Or a good thing. Yeah, it could be either. And I would like to add, that I've really enjoyed working with you this past year. And, as a new chair and, just being able to work together, forming a really, I think, good relationship. And I really have valued that and have learned a lot. And just wish you the best and hope you can really now enjoy your retirement. And
Yes, thank you.
so thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Okay. Now,
I'll do a motion to adjourn.
okay, a second, okay,
Hi.
we're done.
Get job offers, this retirement.
Yeah, I've got 3.
Yes.